Welcome to the last lecture of Unit 2 or 4, depending on when you're viewing this. But this is lecture 4C, and it'll wrap up fingerprints. So I'd like you to get out of this the types of fingerprints and understand that altering prints, not a simple feat. That fingerprint reliability, although we could say that there can be a one-to-one match and you are the only person that we know of that has the prints that you have, the reliability has a lot to do with who's trying to make those matches or exclusions. And we'll see that even fingerprints will at one point get surpassed with increased technologies. So to begin, a little bit of review, right? Hope you're at a spot where all of these are identifiable. And you could tell me, even if I covered up what the names are next to those patterns, what they were. If I asked you to describe the ridges, you should be able to do that. And if I asked you to locate the deltas or the core or make a ridge count, these are things that you should be able to do at this point. So the review here for the arch, the top guy there, I would describe that as ridges entering one side and exiting the other. We see that there's no deltas. The loop, we've got the ridges entering and exiting the same side with one delta. And then the whirl, although there's a lot of ways you could describe it, I usually say it's like a bullseye shape. And you've got the two deltas that we see highlighted there on both sides of the whirl. So those are the main ones that you're responsible for. You should be aware that there's subcategories of each and all the bits of minutia that could go into them, but those are the three main types, and that's what you'll be accountable for. So our print types, not the pattern types, but the type of print that could be left behind. The term patent fingerprint or plastic fingerprint or latent fingerprint, that's what I want to focus on here. So of these three, we'll start with a patent fingerprint. And you may have heard of a patent press. It's when a mold presses into an ink or a dye and then onto something else and it leaves that impression behind. Patent fingerprints, they basically work under that same process. Sometimes they're called visible prints because we can see them easily. So if I were to touch ink, like in a traditional like fingerprint lineup, or I touch some blood or some mud or some paint, and then I touch something else, you would leave a transfer of your print behind. That's referred to as a patent fingerprint. We've got plastic fingerprints, and they're basically just an impression. So the plastic fingerprint that we see left behind here was on a little clay tablet. Modeling clay or Play-Doh, that'd be a great example, although it doesn't have to just be those two things. Perhaps a tacky bar of soap or, some sort of a putty, maybe wax or perhaps blood that's drying. Something that's basically going to have the ability to take an imprint and have it left behind. That could be a plastic fingerprint. The last of these three, the one that we usually think of when you're thinking of like forensics investigators out there looking for prints, that would be a latent fingerprint. So latent, that's the opposite of like blatant. Like if I said you were blatantly cheating, that would mean that it was obvious that you were cheating. So a latent fingerprint, not so obvious. A lot of times these are referred to as hidden prints. And this would be just the oils or like the natural fluids from your fingers that are left behind when you touch something. So in order to really see these, they'd have to be dusted or chemically treated or perhaps even lasers used. If you've ever touched like glasses or like a sunglasses lens or a clear window or maybe like a glass tabletop, I guess I'm getting kind of old and people probably don't use like CDs, compact discs anymore, but when I was a young man and we'd listen to music on the CDs, you'd have to be careful to grab them by the edges so you didn't get prints on the part that was readable. Maybe on your cell phone, the touch screen there, that glass cover, you've seen that you leave prints behind on there. Those would be examples of latent fingerprints. So can you see them if you hold them up to the light, look real carefully? without being dusted or chemically treated or lasers used, yeah, but you know, really to be able to get a good view of what the ridge patterns are doing, they would have to be discovered somehow. So that's the latent fingerprint. Here's a quick video on how you could dust for prints at home.
How to dust for fingerprints. Ever wanted to find out who stole the cookie from the cookie jar? Take a page from crime scene investigators and get the proof you need. You will need a small or medium-sized balloon, a lit candle, a powder makeup brush, and clear tape. Step 1. Fill the balloon halfway with water from the tap. Remove from the faucet and fill the other half with air. Tie it off. Step 2. Light a candle. Hold the balloon at the knot end and dangle it above the flame so the tip of the flame touches it. After 15 to 30 seconds, the smoke from the candle will collect as soot on the balloon's surface. Step 3. Using the brush, collect some of the carbon soot from the balloon. Step 4. Brush the area you want to search for fingerprints, coating it lightly with soot. If you need more soot, hold the balloon over the flame again until you get enough soot to dust with. The smoother the surface, the better the fingerprinting results will be. Step 5. Look for the patterns and swirls that identify a fingerprint. The oils in the print will make more of the carbon stick than the areas directly around it. Step 6. Once you've located a print and it's covered in soot, place a piece of clear tape over it. When you remove the tape, the fingerprint will be stuck to it. Did you know? About 40,000 fingerprints are added to the FBI's database every day.
All right, so I don't know if you need to go lighting water balloons on fire to get that soot. You know, as mentioned in class, you could just use a pencil and build up a little reserve of graphite, and that would work just fine without, you know, the possibility of a mess. Anyways, that's a way that you could dust for prints at home, preserve them, lift them, and analyze them further. So here we see a print type. And in the next few slides, we're going to see a print type. So I don't want you to look at the pattern. I want you to just think about what's left behind. So in the little picture here, that's actually a magnet, and that little fur ball or fluff ball there, those are actually iron shavings, very, very fine iron filings, and computer toner, the ink that would be in a cartridge for a printer. And that sticks to the iron, and that little like kind of puff ball, which is really again just like iron filings and computer toner, you could drag it over a print and it would stick to those oils, and voila, it's no longer hidden. So if those clues didn't give it away and you're just looking for the answer to jot down, this would be a latent fingerprint. It's not blatantly obvious. It had to be, you know, treated to be able to really see those details. This looks like someone's touched paint or blood or some sort of a red fluid and then touched the paper here. This would be an example of a a patent fingerprint. This would be a visible print. Here, a little tricky. You know, after I put this one in and found this picture, I started thinking, well, perhaps people would interpret these differently. So if you saw this and you were like, oh, well, it looks like they had something, you know, white, some sort of paint or grit or something on their hands, and they touched something and left it behind, then you might be thinking, oh, this must be a patent fingerprint, and I would agree. If you were looking at this and you were like, oh, I thought investigators had already dusted for this, and this is what they had left behind so that they could photograph it or preserve that evidence or document it, then you'd probably be thinking it's a latent fingerprint. I don't think you should be thinking that it is one of these, which is an impression left behind, and this would be a plastic fingerprint. Looks like somebody left a fingerprint indention or into, I don't know what that is, you know, clay or Play-Doh or putty or whatever. So here we see an inked fingerprint left behind. If this was an inked fingerprint left behind, it's visible as is. It's a transfer of material. This must be a patent fingerprint. Impressions left behind, plastic. Here we see dusted prints on a wine bottle. So if they were dusted, that means that they had to be revealed. They weren't obvious, so these would be a latent print. So if nothing else, looking back on those three type prints, the plastic, the patent, and the latent. You might remember way back when we talked about types of evidence, and I said, just trust me, fingerprints are physical evidence. It seems weird because I know it's from you and you're a biological creature, and why isn't it biological evidence? Think of those three print types. If I leave an impression, I've just left an impression behind. If I leave transferred material, I've left transferred material behind. The only one of the three that's actually like biological material would be that latent fingerprint. So since one of the three is biological material, or maybe another way of saying that is two of the three aren't, that's why fingerprints go under physical evidence. So you might remember when we first started looking at this unit, and I had you read through a bit of text. There was the story of the safe cracker. Perhaps you need to go back and see about Gustus Winkler. But he's not the only one who had the bright idea of trying to alter his prints or disguise his prints. Cash, couldn't they wear gloves? Sure, they could wear gloves. But, a lot of times criminals make poor decisions and they don't think things through real well. But trying to alter your prints, one, in my opinion, it's not such a great idea because, I mean, think about it. If I'm going to go out and alter my prints and then commit crimes and then I get caught and they're looking for someone with weird altered prints and I have weird altered prints, I've really made it a lot easier for them to identify me. Now, if you were going to say, well, I'm done with my life of crime, that's all behind me, I just don't want to get caught and pay my dues, I just don't want it tied back to me in my past, and you altered your prints, I guess I could kind of wrap my head around that, but again, you're better off just not committing crimes because you'll get caught. Augustus Winkler wasn't the only one, though. Smiling Gus did try to have his surgically removed. John Dillinger, pretty famous gangster back in the day, he's also allegedly tried to alter his prints. He'd heard of pineapple pickers in, I believe, Cuba that had like lost their prints and thought, man, maybe the abrasive husk of the pineapple and the citric acid somehow permanently removed them, and tried to go into some backdoor alleyway doctors to do such a thing. But to the best of my knowledge, it did not work real well for Mr. Dillinger either. So, yuck. Look on the left there. Oh my goodness gracious. That does not look right. What the heck? The picture that I got this from online, apparently this was someone who was trying to illegally sneak into the country, and they were getting caught and they were continuously being identified by fingerprints. So they got the bright idea of going to, again, another unscrupulous doctor in an alleyway that would take a cadaver, a corpse, a dead person's fingertips, and try to surgically attach them after they'd removed the person's prints, basically a fingerprint tip transplant. And I'm not a medical doctor, but that doesn't look good. And I don't think it ended well. And I'm pretty sure you could be in some dire straits if you tried to do such a thing. A little less severe, but still questionable. On the right there, that was someone who'd tried to sizzle their prints off with a frying pan. They put a frying pan onto a stove with nothing in there, turned on the heat, let it get extremely hot, and I guess they thought that if they were to just sear their prints off, that would absolve them of their past crimes. Not easy to do. Could end very, very poorly. I would discourage you from trying to alter or disguise your prints. So with prints, let's just say they do get them. How reliable are they? Remember, we said even identical twins, you're forming in mama's womb about 10 weeks in, and that little bit of blood flow different from one fetus to the next alters even identical twin prints. No one has the same. Cash, couldn't they be real, real similar? Yeah, of course they could. Well, here's another thing you got to consider. Sometimes it's people analyzing fingerprints or a computer. And either of those could make mistakes. So I want you to be aware that, while we could say that you're a one-to-one identifier with fingerprints, if it's close and someone makes a mistake, that's not good. I realized, I actually graduated high school in 95 to date myself with my CD collection. But anyways, in 95, the last study that I saw, they had a bunch of investigators that were given prints that they knew who it came from, so it was a controlled experiment. And what they found was 1 in 5 examiners made a false positive. And that means that they said, yes, this is a match when it was incorrect. Now, you might think 1 in 5, not too shabby. I mean, sheesh, what are we, only 200, or what was that, 20% of the time? So in baseball, that'd be only 200 off. You're batting an 800. Oh my goodness gracious, that's fantastic. Well, this isn't baseball. Think of it more like flight control. I mean, you have to be right all the time. If 1 in 5 people that went to court with fingerprints as a piece of evidence had a false positive and got sent to jail, that's awful. So while 1 in 5 could be argued isn't so bad, I don't think you'd want to be that 1 in 5 that had the problem. So as technologies increase, I mean, we'd like to say that there's less and less error, but it's impossible for me to say, oh, there's no way someone could screw it up. So with the prints being analyzed, right? We've talked about this a bit, and we've seen some of the examples of how the FBI would now be able to dump those into a database, a computerized digital system, versus the olden days where everything was just inked cards, and it would have been painfully boring and difficult to just go from inked card to ink card to try to make a comparison. But it's not quite to the point that we see in some of the TV shows where you get like a instant readout in your car. There's this system called the AIFIS, and that stands for the Integrated Automated Fingerprint Identification System. And it's a 24/7, 365. That's 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, 365 days a year. It takes about 2 hours though to get results back from that. At least when I made this, that was what I was told. Perhaps that's been improved. You go back to the end of the 90s there, and manual search could take months and months to occur. So that's a huge, huge leap for the better. And I'd be willing to bet that, like I said, even since I'd made this, that's improved further. So, speaking of improvements, we've looked at how fingerprints can be identifiers to try to link people to, a crime, or perhaps exclude them from committing the crime because those prints couldn't match. We've also looked at how fingerprints can be used as security features, like with the MythBusters video. Geez, I'm dating myself again. When I was a young man, well, I guess we didn't even have cell phones, but a few models ago, iPhones had like a thumbprint reader on like a physical button you'd press. Now I realize there's like facial recognition. That's an example of how technology is making improvements and pushing things further. Retinal scan, which would be like the vein patterns in your eyes, those can be read as individual identifiers as well. And on the right here, what we see is there's actually things that can scan and read the vein patterns under your skin, which would be a unique identifier as well. I'm sure there's others that exist besides just, the retinal or the vein patterns or the facial recognition that, is right around the corner. But as almost always, keep your fingers crossed for science and technology, and you'd like to think that it'll make improvements. So that's that. That's the end of our fingerprints unit, the final lecture. Hopefully you have a better understanding of not only the 3 prints, but some of the other information that was covered. Till we meet again, take care.